Hello everyone, welcome to this podcast on the initial margin monitoring service for Phase 5 firms to help them comply with the uncleared margin rules for OTC derivatives. The service will be provided by AcadiaSoft, the leading provider of risk and collateral management services for firms trading in uncleared OTC derivatives. My name is Michael Imson and I'm a senior content editor at Financial Times Live, the FT's conference division. I'm also a chartered member of the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment, the CISI, and the Deputy Chairman of the CISI's FinTech Professional Forum. And with me here is Mark Demo, who's Director of Industry and Strategy at AcadiaSoft. Mark is based in New York. Now, first, just a few words of explanation. The new margin rules for non-centrally cleared over-the-counter derivatives began to be phased in around the world in 2016. There have been 3 phases so far, with Phase 4 coming into effect this September, and Phase 5, the final phase, taking effect in September 2020. From those 2 dates, Phase 4 and 5 firms will have to post and receive initial margin. However, there's an important exception for Phase 4 and 5 firms. They will not have to post initial margin if the current trading relationship with any individual counterparty is below a threshold of 50 million euros, and that's quite a nice benefit to have. But as soon as that threshold is reached, the IM will have to be posted. And the problem is, it will be difficult for firms to know when they're close to that threshold or when it's been reached or exceeded. And that's why AcadiaSoft is introducing an initial margin monitoring service specifically designed to help Phase 5 firms keep track of the amounts they're currently trading with each of their counterparties. Which brings me to Mark, who's going to talk about all of this and the IM monitoring service. But before I kick off with my questions, Mark, can you just introduce yourself? Tell us about your role at the company and your experience in this part of the financial markets.
Hi, Michael, and thank you for having me on the program. I'm responsible for industry engagement and strategy here at AcadiaSoft, and I'm in my 4th year here. Prior to that, I spent 24 years at JP Morgan in various collateral and infrastructure roles. Industry engagement primarily means that I run the various internal and external working groups that we host here at AcadiaSoft. We call that our secret sauce for client and prospects on various topics that are relevant for initial margin compliance and other key industry initiatives that we're involved in. It also means that I'm the primary AcadiaSoft point person for dealing with prudential regulators around the globe.
Okay, thank you for that intro, Mark. First key question then, what's the latest news on the industry advocacy and relief for IM Phase 5 firms?
Sure. In late March, BCBS IOSCO published guidance to the market indicating that firms in scope for IM Phase 4 and 5 need not negotiate documentation or become operationally ready if they were below the 50 million IM threshold permissible under the regulations. This point was one of a number of advocacy points that ISDA and SIFMA have been pushing for. However, this was the only advocacy point that IOSCO opined on. Industry experts have indicated that up to 1,000 firms could be in scope for IM Phase 5. And this guidance from IOSCO, if eventually supported by local prudential regulators, could positively impact up to 2/3 to 3/4 of all in-scope firms who would have exceeded the 8 billion gross notional threshold, but never actually had to move margin. So since March, the Hong Kong MOS has come out in support of this guidance, and the CFTC's chairman, Giancarlo, has also recently published a letter of support of these guidelines to Chairman Quarles of the Fed. And we expect other regulators around the globe to weigh in on the matter over the next few months.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's clear. Could you tell us about this guidance from the BCBS, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, and IOSCO? What does this guidance, which came out in March, what does it mean for Phase 5 firms?
Well, while the IOSCO guidance does provide the market with some hope for relief for smaller firms who fall in scope, but aren't ever expected to move initial margin, it also creates a new expectation or new responsibility on the firms that are already in scope for IM to help inform those who now don't need to immediately do any work or become operationally ready, but may need at some point in the future to do so.
Right. So what is AcadiaSoft planning to do as a result of this guidance?
Well, shortly after IOSCO came out with their guidance, AcadiaSoft put out a press release announcing the creation of an IM monitoring service that would serve the market as a single point of reference for IM exposure for phase 5 firms.
Right. Well, how is it going to work? I've seen the press release, which gives some basic details, but it doesn't go into a lot of detail. So perhaps you could explain how the IM monitoring service is going to work and when you expect it to be available.
Sure. So today, we're fortunate enough that every in-scope phase 1, 2, and 3 firm sends their IM exposure to AcadiaSoft daily for IM calculation and reconciliation. In fact, we estimate that we probably perform SIM calculations over 7.5 million times a day. And because we expect every in-scope phase 4 firm to do the same, we think it's a natural extension of our existing service to provide the phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 firms with one place to send their anticipated IM exposure to phase 5 firms, and to provide those phase 5 firms with a single central location to log in and see their anticipated IM exposure from all of their in-scope dealer counterparties. This service will save an immense amount of time for phase 5s who in its absence will need to contact each of their dealers on a regular basis to ask what their IM exposure number is, and it'll also give dealers a single, organized, and consistent method of distributing key information to their in-scope phase 5 firms. So, and we expect this service to be up and running in the fourth quarter of this year. So we think it'll provide a great service to folks who are in scope above the 8 billion threshold, but don't expect to move margin, because they'll be able to, with one login, they'll be able to simply see the expected exposure that they'll have to their phase 1, 2, and 3, and 4 counterparties, provided in one simple place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sounds complicated. It sounds there's a lot of work that goes on in the background. How do you gather all that information from all those counterparties around the world to calculate exactly what each counterparty's current OTC transaction exposure is? It must be quite a feat.
Actually, it has been, but it's been a 3-year journey, 3.5 now, as we prepare for all phase 4 firms to go live. But as I mentioned, every firm that's in scope for initial margin uses us today for initial margin calculation and reconciliation. And what that means is they send us their exposure data every day, and we perform our own calculation or our own validation of the individual firm's calculation. And then when their counterparty provides that same information, we perform a reconciliation of the inputs to the calculation. So in a sense, we already have this service, this central service up and running. And we believe that there are a couple important tweaks or changes that we and the firms who send us data on a daily basis need to make, but we view it as a simple extension of the service to support phase 5 firms ahead of their go-live date, to give them a clear view of what their anticipated exposure will be, such in the run-up to their go-live date before September 2020, such that there are no surprises when September 2020 comes. Now,
that BCBS IOSCO announcement of that relief for firms trading below that 50 million threshold, when it was announced in March, it said that relief would apply to phase 4 firms and phase 5 firms. But your service is focusing on phase 5 firms. So can you explain the difference in ability to benefit from that relief between phase 4 and phase 5 firms?
That's a good question. Thank you for asking. We really view this service as up and running and necessary for phase 5 firms, and we view the guidance from IOSCO and the expected but yet to be received opinions from local prudential regulators as too late to help Phase 4 firms. So, which is why we focused on Phase 5. So, the Phase 4 firms are head down and working to comply with Phase 4 September 2019 go live, and we don't think that the guidance will come in time to benefit them.
Mm. And another question I have, when I did a lot of reading on this topic, it was interesting to see how many Phase 5 firms there are. I think I'm right in saying that Phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 firms only account for about 60 or 70 of the world's biggest firms, and then Phase 5 firms, about another 1,000 or 1,200 come in. Why is it there's such a big difference between this relatively small number of firms in Phases 1 to 4 and then a huge number in Phase 5?
It's a fair question. The thresholds that the regulators set between Phase 4 and Phase 5 was Phase 4 firms with an average aggregate notional amount greater than 750 billion. So if you exceeded that threshold, you were in Phase 4. But Phase 5 drops precipitously to 8 billion gross notional, and therefore you have many more firms who most would argue are not systemically significant rolled up in the last phase of the regulation.
Yeah,
thus the guidance from IOSCO to provide some relief for them.
Right. Okay, Mark, we're nearly out of time. You've gone into a lot of detail on this. There's a lot for people to think about. What would you say are the key points for them to remember, that you'd like them to remember about what you've said in the last 10 minutes or so?
I think I'd like them to remember that there's no firm in the world that has more experience than AcadiaSoft in helping folks comply with the initial margin requirements. And our suggestion is that if you're in scope for the initial margin rules, but you don't ever expect to move margin, call us and we'd love to talk to you about the IM monitoring service. If you're in scope for IM and you do expect to move margin, our risk services suite is something that you should be focused on, you should be aware of, because we've bundled all of our existing services into one low-cost, low-touch offering to ensure one connection and one solution to bring your firm into compliance. And we also host a monthly IM Phase 5 working group for, there's no cost, and you'll immediately get connected to a group of your peers who are working through the same IM compliance challenge as you are. So the last point that I'd like to leave the audience with is that we've seen firms attempt the compliance challenge on their own, and they have admitted that through that process, they've wasted time and they've wasted resources. And our suggestion is that you join our established community, and we'll help bring you into compliance in the quickest and most inexpensive way possible, and in the manner that's right for your firm.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That's all we have time for. It's been a fascinating discussion. It's a complicated subject. It's been one that's been developing over many years. Still got a year or so to go before it all comes to fruition. So thanks for explaining that. If any listeners have any questions, you can just send them into AcadiaSoft. The email address is info@acadiasoft.com. And once again, Mark, thank you for taking part in this podcast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.